They say marriage is for better or for worse. But for Amelia Foster, the vow ended the moment the doctor said the word infertile. Stripped of her home, her dignity, and her name, she was thrown onto the cold streets of New York by the man who swore to love her. She thought her life was over. She was just a waitress, scraping by on tips and heartbreak. But fate has a wicked sense of humor. When her ex-husband tried to humiliate her one last time, he didn't realize who was watching from the shadows. The most dangerous man in the city didn't just tip her. He offered her a new life. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a rejected wife became the queen of the underworld. The fluorescent lights of the clinic on the Upper East Side hummed with a sound that only Amelia Foster could hear. It was a low, buzzing drone that seemed to vibrate against her skull. Across the mahogany desk, Dr. Aris adjusted his glasses, his expression practiced and professionally sympathetic. "I'm afraid the results remain conclusive, Mrs. Bennett," the doctor said, sliding a thick file across the desk. "The structural damage to the uterus is irreversible. Conception is not just unlikely, it is a physiological impossibility." Amelia felt the air leave the room. She looked at the empty chair beside her. Brad hadn't come. He had a merger meeting, or at least that's what he had told her this morning while checking his reflection in the mirror, more concerned with his tie knot than the potential death of their family line. "Thank you, Doctor," she whispered, standing up on shaky legs. She walked out of the clinic and into the biting November wind of Manhattan. When she arrived at the Bennett estate in Greenwich, the iron gates were already open. That was unusual. Usually security was tight. She parked her modest sedan next to Brad's gleaming black SUV and a cherry-red convertible she didn't recognize. As she entered the foyer, the sound of crystal clinking against glass echoed from the living room. She found Brad sitting on the leather sofa, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. But he wasn't alone. His mother, Lydia Bennett, was sitting in the armchair, looking like a vulture who had just spotted a carcass. Next to Brad sat a woman Amelia knew vaguely from the country club Tiffany, younger, blonder, and currently resting a hand on Brad's knee. "You're home early," Brad said. He didn't stand up. Amelia clutched her purse. "I went to see Dr. Aris, Brad. You knew that." Lydia let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "And let me guess, the oven is still broken, isn't it?" "Lydia, please," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "Brad, can we speak in private?" "No," Brad said, his voice cold and flat. He took a sip of the scotch. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Tiffany and Mother. Actually, don't bother. Dr. Aris called me an hour ago. I pay him enough to ensure I get the news first." Amelia froze. "So you know." "I know that I need an heir, Amelia," Brad said, standing up. He looked at her, not with anger, but with bored indifference, which hurt worse. "The Bennett legacy requires a son. We have been married for 4 years. You have failed." "Failed?" Amelia stepped forward. "I'm your wife, Brad, not a brood mare." "In this family there is no difference," Lydia snapped. She stood up and walked over to Amelia, her eyes hard. "You were a charity case, Amelia. A waitress Brad picked up because he thought you were charming. We overlooked your lack of pedigree because we thought you'd at least be fertile. But you bring nothing to this table. No money, no status, and now no children." Brad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table. "Divorce papers," Brad said. "My lawyers drafted them this morning. You'll find the terms sufficient. A small settlement, enough to get you an apartment in Queens, maybe." "You're kicking me out?" Amelia asked, tears finally spilling over. Just like that, because of a medical condition. Tiffany giggled, covering her mouth. Oh, honey, it's not just the condition. Brad has needs I've been meeting for 6 months. The room spun. Amelia looked at Brad, waiting for a denial. He just smirked and pulled Tiffany closer, resting his hand on her stomach. Tiffany is pregnant, Amelia, Brad said. It's a boy. We found out yesterday. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She looked at the man she had washed clothes for, cooked for, and loved for 4 years. He looked at her like she was a stain on the rug. Get out, Brad said. The security team will pack your things and have them sent to whatever motel you check into. But you leave now. You're trespassing. Brad, it's raining, Amelia whispered. Then you better start walking fast, Lydia sneered. Amelia didn't scream. She didn't fight. She realized in that moment that screaming at people who had no souls was a waste of breath. She turned around, walked out the heavy oak door, and down the long driveway. The rain soaked her silk blouse instantly. She walked for 2 miles to the nearest gas station. Shivering, her heart turned to ice. She dialed a taxi, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the phone twice. She had lost everything. But as she watched the headlights of the taxi cut through the rain, Amelia Foster made a silent vow. She would survive. And one day, Brad Bennett would regret the day he threw her away. 3 months later. The sound of jazz piano drifted through the smoky air of the Velvet Room. It was an upscale lounge in Tribeca, the kind of place where politicians made handshake deals and Wall Street brokers spent their bonuses on bottles of wine that cost more than a car. Amelia adjusted her black apron, checking her reflection in the brass rail of the bar. She looked different. The soft, hopeful light in her eyes was gone, replaced by a guarded steeliness. She had cut her hair into a sharp bob and lost weight, her cheekbones more defined. She wasn't Mrs. Bennett anymore. She was just Amelia, the best waitress the Velvet Room had. Amelia, table 4 needs a refill. The manager, a frantic man named Jerry, hissed as he passed by. And stay away from table 1 unless summoned. You know the rules. I know, Jerry, she said calmly. Table 1 was situated in the back corner, shrouded in shadows and separated from the rest of the floor by a velvet rope. It was reserved every Friday night for one man and his entourage. Brian Valenti. Amelia knew the name. Everyone in New York knew the name, though it was rarely spoken above a whisper. The Valenti family controlled the shipping docks, the construction unions, and half the real estate in Brooklyn. Brian was the head of the family, the capo. She had served him only once before. He hadn't spoken to her, merely nodded when she placed his espresso down. He was terrifyingly handsome. Dark hair, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and eyes the color of cold obsidian. He radiated a power that made the air around him heavy. Tonight, the lounge was packed. Amelia was rushing between tables, balancing a tray of martinis, when a loud, boisterous laugh cut through the room. Her blood ran cold. She knew that laugh. She froze, turning slowly toward the entrance. Walking in, flanked by the maitre d', was Brad Bennett. On his arm was Tiffany, her stomach now showing a visible baby bump beneath a tight sequined dress. Following them were 2 of Brad's business partners, loud men in ill-fitting suits. "Right this way, Mr. Bennett," the hostess said. "We want the best table," Brad announced loudly, his voice slurring slightly. He was already drunk. "We're celebrating. My company just acquired the Kensington lot." Amelia tried to shrink back into the shadows near the service station, but it was too late. Brad's eyes scanned the room and landed on her. His smirk was instantaneous. "Well, well," Brad called out, stopping in the middle of the dining room. "Look who it is, boys. My ex-wife. I told you she'd end up serving drinks." The room went quiet. Patrons turned to look. Tiffany giggled, leaning into Brad. "Oh God, Brad, don't make a scene. It's embarrassing for her." Brad ignored her and walked over to Amelia, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale scotch. "How's the single life, Amelia?" he sneered. "Living in a penthouse yet, or still in that roach motel?" "Please sit down, sir," Amelia said, her voice tight. "I'm working." "You're working because I allow it," Brad laughed. "I could buy this place and fire you in 10 minutes. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "Maybe if you beg, I'll give you a tip. Come on, beg. Show Tiffany how you used to beg me for money." "Let go of me," Amelia said, trying to pull her arm away. "Brad, stop," Tiffany whined, looking around nervously. "I'm just having fun," Brad snarled. He squeezed Amelia's arm harder, shaking her. The tray in her other hand wobbled, and a glass of red wine tipped over, splashing onto Brad's expensive Italian shoes. Brad roared. "You stupid bitch! These are custom alligator!" He raised his hand. Amelia flinched, closing her eyes, expecting the strike. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice was low baritone and vibrated with lethal calm. It didn't shout, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant like a razor blade. Brad froze, his hand raised in mid-air. Amelia opened her eyes. Standing 3 feet away was Brian Valenti. He had risen from table 1. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hands were in his pockets, but his posture was coiled, ready to strike. 2 large men, his bodyguards Rocco and Enzo, stood silently behind him. "Who the hell are you?" Brad demanded, though his voice wavered. He dropped Amelia's arm. Brian didn't look at Brad. He looked at Amelia. His dark eyes scanned her face, checking for injuries. "Are you all right, Amelia?" Brad blinked. "You know this waitress." Brian finally turned his gaze to Brad. It was like a lion looking at a rat. "I come here for the quiet," Brian said softly. "You are very loud, and you are touching things that do not belong to you." "She's my ex-wife," Brad blustered, trying to regain his dominance. "I can do what I want. Do you know who I am?" "I'm Brad Bennett. My family owns Bennett Construction." Brian took a step closer. He towered over Brad. "Bennett Construction," Brian repeated, tasting the words. "Small time. Sloppy foundations." "Listen, pal." Brad started reaching out to poke Brian's chest. In a blur of motion, Rocco intercepted Brad's hand, twisting it behind his back with a sickening crunch. Brad screamed, dropping to his knees. The entire restaurant was dead silent. "Get him out of here," Brian said to Rocco, sounding bored. "He's ruining my dinner." Rocco dragged the screaming Brad toward the exit. Tiffany shrieked and ran after them, followed by the terrified business partners. The silence in the room was heavy. Brian turned back to Amelia. She was shaking, clutching the serving tray to her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Valenti. I'll clean this up." Brian reached out and gently took the tray from her hands, placing it on a nearby table. "You will not clean anything." He looked at the manager, Jerry, who was cowering behind the bar. "Close the restaurant. Everyone out. Now." Jerry scrambled to obey. "Yes, Mr. Valenti. Right away, folks. The house is covering your tabs. Please exit immediately." Within 2 minutes, the lounge was empty save for Emilia Bryan and his guards. Emilia felt exposed. "Mr. Valenti, Get your coat," Bryan said. It wasn't a request. "Where are we going?" Bryan walked toward the door, pausing to look back at her. The harshness in his eyes softened just a fraction. "That man," Bryan said, nodding toward the door where Brad had been dragged out. "He broke you. I watched him do it. I have been watching you for 3 months, Emilia. I have seen you work until your feet bleed. I have seen you cry in the alley on your break." He held out his hand. "You are done serving people like him. Come with me." Emilia looked at his hand. It was large, scarred, and steady. She looked at the empty restaurant, the stain on the floor, the life of servitude she was trapped in. Then she looked at Bryan. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and jumping was the only way to fly. She untied her apron, let it drop to the floor, and took his hand. The black town car glided through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan like a phantom. Inside, the silence was absolute save for the rhythmic thrum-thrum of the wipers. Emilia sat pressed against the leather door, her hands still trembling in her lap. Bryan sat on the other side of the spacious back seat. He hadn't spoken since they left the restaurant. He was typing on a phone, the blue light illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a predator contemplating its next meal. "Why?" Emilia's voice was barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of the silence. Bryan didn't look up immediately. He finished typing a message, locked the screen, and slid the phone into his breast pocket. Then he turned his obsidian eyes toward her. "Why what?" he asked, his voice low. "Why help me? Why bring me here?" Emilia gestured to the tinted windows. "You're Bryan Valenti. People say you kill men for looking at you wrong. I'm just a waitress who got fired." "You weren't just fired, Emilia. You were discarded," Bryan corrected. "And I didn't help you out of charity. I don't believe in charity." The car turned smoothly into a private underground garage. The heavy steel gates rumbled shut behind them, sealing them off from the world. "Then what is this?" she asked, fear spiking in her chest. "An investment," Bryan said. The car door was opened by Rocco. Bryan stepped out and offered his hand again. Emilia hesitated, then took it. He led her to a private elevator that scanned his retina before opening. As they ascended, Emilia's ears popped. When the doors opened, Emilia gasped. The penthouse was unlike anything she had ever seen, even in the Bennett estate. It was a sprawling expanse of glass, steel, and dark wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a city that looked like a bed of jewels from this height. It was cold, masculine, and intimidating. "Make yourself a drink," Bryan said, walking toward a massive mahogany desk overlooking the city. He took off his jacket and tossed it onto a leather chair. Emilia stayed near the elevator. "I don't want a drink. I want answers." Bryan turned, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "You have spirit. Brad Bennett suppressed that. He liked you meek." He walked over to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He walked to her and held one out. "Drink. It will calm your nerves." Emilia took the glass but didn't drink. "Mr. Valenti. Bryan. Bryan, you said I was an investment. What does that mean?" Bryan took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "Brad Bennett is currently trying to bid on the Neoport project. It's a massive government contract to renovate the Brooklyn waterfront. It's worth $3 billion. Emilia nodded slowly. "I heard him talking about it. He said it would secure the family legacy. It would, Brian agreed. It would also ruin me. My family has controlled the docks for 3 generations. If Bennett Construction gets that contract, they will push my unions out. They will bring in federal oversight. It's an act of war. So you want to kill him? Amelia asked, her voice trembling. Brian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. If I kill him, the contract goes to his second-in-command, and the police come knocking at my door. No. Death is too easy for men like Brad. I want to destroy him. I want him to lose his money, his reputation, his legacy, and his freedom. He took a step closer to Amelia. The scent of sandalwood and rain surrounded her. I need to know his weaknesses. I need to know where he hides his offshore accounts. I need to know which inspectors he bribes. And you, Amelia, you were his wife for 4 years. You managed the household. You heard the phone calls. Amelia lowered her gaze. I signed a non-disclosure agreement when we divorced. If I talk, he sues me for everything I don't have. Let him sue, Brian said dismissively. By the time he files the paperwork, he won't be able to afford a lawyer. He reached out and tilted her chin up with a single finger. But it's not just about information. I need a partner. The Neo-Port Committee is traditional. They don't trust a mobster like me. They want a family man. I need a fiancé. Someone elegant, someone who knows the social circles, someone who has a personal vendetta against the competition. Amelia's eyes widened. You want me to pretend to be your fiancé? I want you to be the Queen of New York, Brian said intensely. Brad threw you out like garbage because you couldn't give him a child. I am offering you the chance to take everything he has, his money, his status, his pride. I will give you the world, Amelia. All you have to do is stand by my side and watch him burn. Amelia looked at the man before her. He was offering her a deal with the devil. It was dangerous. It was insane. But then she remembered the look on Brad's face when he tossed the divorce papers on the table. She remembered Tiffany's cruel giggle. She remembered the rain. Amelia took a long sip of the whiskey. It burned her throat, but it made her feel alive. I don't just want him to burn Brian, she said, her voice steadying. I want to light the match. Brian smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. Welcome home, Amelia. The next morning, Amelia woke up in a bed that was larger than her entire apartment in Queens. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, cool and soft against her skin. For a moment, she panicked, forgetting where she was. Then the memory of the night before came rushing back. The deal, the penthouse, the revenge. There was a knock on the door. Come in, she called out, pulling the duvet up to her chin. The door opened, and a petite woman with sharp glasses and a tablet walked in, followed by a rack of clothes wheeled by 2 assistants. Good morning, Miss Foster, the woman said briskly. I'm Chloe. Mr. Valenti hired me. We have exactly 4 hours. 4 hours for what? Amelia asked, sitting up. For the transformation, Chloe said, snapping her fingers. The assistants began unzipping garment bags, revealing dresses of silk velvet and satin in deep crimsons, midnights, and emeralds. Mr. Valenti has a lunch meeting at Le Coucou at 1:00 p.m. You will be attending. The press will be there. Amelia scrambled out of bed. I can't. Look at me. She motioned to her pale skin and her jagged, self-cut hair. Chloe walked over, removed Amelia's glasses, and studied her face. The bone structure is exquisite. The eyes are intelligent. The rest, we can fix the rest. The next 4 hours were a blur of activity that felt more like a military operation than a spa day. A team of stylists descended upon Amelia. Her hair was dyed a rich, dark chocolate and styled into sleek Hollywood waves. Her skin was exfoliated, moisturized, and painted to perfection. When it came time for the clothes, Chloe bypassed the soft pastels Amelia used to wear for Brad. "No," Chloe said, tossing a beige cardigan into the bin. "That is the wardrobe of a victim. Today, you are a weapon." She handed Amelia a dress. It was a structured midi dress in a deep sapphire blue with a neckline that was tasteful but daring. It hugged her curves in a way that made her look powerful, not just sexy. Amelia stepped into the dress and allowed Chloe to zip it up. She stepped into a pair of Louboutin heels, the red soles gleaming like a warning signal. "Turn around," Chloe commanded. Amelia turned to the full-length mirror. She gasped. The woman staring back wasn't the tired waitress. She wasn't the rejected wife. She looked regal. She looked dangerous. She looked like she belonged in the penthouse. The door to the bedroom opened, and Brian walked in. He was dressed in a navy bespoke suit, checking his watch. "Amelia, we are running late." He stopped. Brian Valenti. The man who stared down hitmen without blinking froze. His eyes swept over her from the heels to the dark waves of her hair. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The air in the room seemed to crackle with sudden tension. "Do I look okay?" Amelia asked, suddenly, shy. Brian walked over to her. He stood behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror. He looked like the darkness, and she looked like the storm. "You look lethal," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. "One last thing." He opened it. Inside was a necklace, a stunning string of diamonds with a sapphire pendant the size of a quail egg. "Brian, I can't wear that," Amelia whispered. "That must be worth millions." "It belonged to my grandmother," he said, unclasping it. "She wore it when she negotiated peace treaties between the 5 families. It is a symbol of power. Wear it." He placed the cold metal against her neck and clasped it. His fingers lingered on her skin for a second longer than necessary. "Are you ready?" he asked, meeting her eyes in the mirror. Amelia took a deep breath. She thought of Brad. She thought of the way he looked at Tiffany. "Yes," she said. The lunch at Le Coucou was a calculated spectacle. As soon as the valet opened the door of the Rolls-Royce, cameras flashed. The paparazzi had been tipped off. Brian made sure of it. Brian stepped out first, buttoning his jacket. He turned and extended his hand. Amelia took it, stepping out onto the sidewalk with a grace she had practiced all morning. "Who is she?" a photographer shouted. "Mr. Valenti, is this a new partner?" Brian ignored them, placing a protective hand on the small of Amelia's back. He guided her through the restaurant, head high. As they were seated at the prime window table, Amelia noticed the whispers. The elite of New York were watching. "Don't look at them," Brian said, softly, opening his menu. "Look at me. To them, you are the only thing that matters in this room." "I'm nervous," Amelia admitted, picking up her water glass. "Don't be. Look at the entrance." Amelia glanced over Brian's shoulder. Walking in was a man Amelia recognized immediately. It was Vincent Thorne, the head of the City Planning Committee, the man who would decide who got the Neo-Port contract. And walking right beside him, laughing loudly, was Brad Bennett. Brad looked confident, shaking Vincent's hand. Then Brad's eyes drifted to the window table. He stopped dead in his tracks. He saw Brian Valenti, the man who had humiliated him the night before. And then he saw the woman, sitting across from him. Brad squinted. He didn't recognize her at first. The hair, the posture, the diamonds, it was a different species of woman. But then Emilia turned her head, locking eyes with him. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She simply raised her glass of champagne in a mocking toast. Brad's jaw dropped. "Emilia," he mouthed, his face draining of color. Vincent Thorne looked between them. "Brad, is something wrong?" Brad couldn't speak. He was staring at his discarded wife, who was currently wearing a necklace worth more than his entire house, sitting with the most dangerous man in the city. Brian leaned forward, covering Emilia's hand with his own. "Showtime, cara mia." Brian signaled the waiter. "Tell Mr. Thorne that Mr. Valenti would like to buy his table a bottle of the 82 Petrus, and tell Mr. Bennett." Brian paused, a cold smile touching his lips. "Tell Mr. Bennett his ex-wife recommends the humble pie. It's the specialty of the house." Emilia watched the waiter deliver the message. She watched Brad turn red, then purple. She watched him stammer an excuse to Vincent Thorne, looking terrified. For the first time in years, Emilia Foster didn't feel empty. She felt full of power. But as she looked back at Brian, who was watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak, she realized something else. This wasn't just a game. She was falling into the orbit of a dark star, and there would be no escaping the gravity. "He looks like he's seen a ghost," Emilia said, a small smile playing on her lips. "He has," Brian replied seriously. "He's seen the ghost of his future failure." Suddenly, Brian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. The playfulness vanished. "What is it?" Emilia asked, sensing the shift. "My men found something," Brian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Brad isn't just bribing inspectors. He's laundering money for the cartel through his mother's charity foundation, and he's using Tiffany's name to sign the checks." Emilia gasped. "Tiffany? But she's just a pawn." "She's a liability," Brian corrected. "And if we use this, she goes to prison, along with the unborn child." Emilia froze. She hated Brad. She despised what Tiffany represented. But a baby, an innocent child. "Brian," she said, her voice urgent. "We can't send a pregnant woman to prison, not for Brad's crimes." Brian looked at her, studying her morality. "This is war, Emilia. Collateral damage happens." "No," Emilia said firmly. She leaned across the table, her sapphire eyes blazing. "I want to destroy Brad. I want to leave him with nothing. But I will not destroy an innocent child. We find another way." Brian stared at her. Most people would have backed down under his gaze. Emilia held it. Slowly, Brian nodded. Respect flickered in his eyes. "Another way," he agreed. "But it will be more dangerous. It means you have to get close to him again." "Close to Brad?" Emilia asked, repulsed. "You need to get the ledger from his safe at the Greenwich estate," Brian said. "Tonight is the annual Bennett Masquerade Ball. He will be there. And so will we." Emilia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Go back to the house where she was thrown out. Walk into the lion's den." She touched the sapphire at her throat. She wasn't Mrs. Bennett anymore. "Get me an invitation," Emilia said. "I'm ready to dance." The Bennett estate in Greenwich loomed against the night sky, a sprawling architectural beast of stone and ivy. For 4 years, this house had been Emilia's prison. She knew every creaky floorboard, every drafty window, and exactly where Lydia Bennett hid her sherry bottles. Tonight, however, the driveway was lined with Bentleys and Ferraris. The annual Bennett Masquerade Ball was the social event of the season, a place where the wealthy hid their faces to reveal their true, hedonistic selves. Amelia sat in the passenger seat of Brian's Bugatti, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She adjusted her mask. It was a masterpiece of filigree silver and sapphires, covering the upper half of her face, but leaving her crimson lips exposed. "You are breathing too fast," Brian noted. He killed the engine, but didn't open the door. The interior was dark, save for the soft glow of the dashboard. He reached over his hand, warm and heavy, on her bare shoulder. "Panic is a scent, Amelia, and predators like Lydia Bennett can smell it." "I'm not panicking," Amelia lied, her voice tight. "I'm just remembering. I organized this party last year. I chose the flowers. I hired the caterers. I was the invisible wife, making sure Brad looked like a king. Now I'm walking in to steal from him." "You aren't stealing," Brian corrected, his thumb tracing the line of her collarbone, sending a shiver down her spine. "You are repossessing. You are balancing the scales. Remember tonight, you are not Amelia Bennett. You are Amelia Foster, the woman who walked through fire and came out holding the match." He put on his own mask, a stark, matte black Venetian piece that made him look like a fallen angel. "Stay close to me until the waltz. When the music swells, I will create the distraction. You have 10 minutes to get to the study." 10 minutes, Amelia repeated. "The safe is behind the portrait of Brad's grandfather, but he changes the code every month." "We're counting on Tiffany," Brian said grimly. "My intel says she knows it. Brad is too lazy to memorize numbers. He likely made her do it." They stepped out of the car. The crisp night air bit at Amelia's skin, but the adrenaline kept her warm. As they ascended the stone steps, the heavy oak doors swung open. The ballroom was a sea of silk feathers and jewels. A live orchestra played a haunting waltz. Waiters with silver trays wove through the crowd. Amelia felt a momentary urge to take a tray and start serving. Old habits died hard, but Brian's arm around her waist anchored her to her new reality. They were an anomaly. In a room full of loud, boisterous, old money types, Brian moved with a silent, predatory grace. People parted for them, whispering behind their hands. "Who is that with Valenti? Is that the waitress? Look at those diamonds. Good Lord, look at the way he holds her." Suddenly, a shrill voice cut through the murmur. "Well, isn't this bold?" Lydia Bennett emerged from the crowd wearing a mask of peacock feathers that did nothing to hide the sneer on her face. She held a glass of champagne like a weapon. "Mr. Valenti," Lydia said, ignoring Amelia entirely. "I wasn't aware we extended an invitation to the criminal element." "I invited myself, Mrs. Bennett," Brian replied, his voice smooth as velvet but sharp as a knife. "I heard you were auctioning off integrity tonight. I wanted to place a bid." Lydia's face tightened. She finally turned her gaze to Amelia. "And you brought your pet. Tell me, Amelia, did you rent the dress, or is it a gift for services rendered?" The old Amelia would have lowered her head. The old Amelia would have apologized for existing. The new Amelia smiled. It was a cold, dazzling smile. "Hello, Lydia," Amelia said, her voice steady. "The dress is mine. Unlike this house, which I hear is leveraged against 3 different banks." Lydia gasped, clutching her pearls. "How dare you? I'd be careful with the champagne, Lydia." Amelia continued, leaning in slightly. "It stains, and we both know you can't afford to replace the carpets anymore." Brian let out a low, appreciative chuckle. "Shall we dance, my love?" He swept Amelia onto the dance floor before Lydia could respond. As they moved into the center of the room, Amelia felt a rush of euphoria. She had stood up to the dragon. "You were magnificent," Brian whispered in her ear as he spun her. His hand was firm on her back, guiding her through the intricate steps. "I learned from the best," she replied. Across the room near the bar, Amelia spotted Brad. He was wearing a gold mask, looking flushed and angry. He was shouting at a waiter. Next to him stood Tiffany. She looked miserable. Her silver dress was too tight for her pregnancy, and she was rubbing her lower back, her face pale. Brad wasn't paying her any attention. In fact, when she tried to speak to him, he waved her off dismissively. "Target acquired," Brian murmured. "The music is changing. Go." The orchestra shifted into a faster, more chaotic tempo. Brian suddenly stopped dancing and turned toward the band, clapping loudly, drawing every eye in the room. He walked toward the stage, demanding a specific song, causing a scene that pulled the security guards toward him. In the confusion, Amelia slipped away. She didn't head for the study immediately. She headed for the powder room, where she saw Tiffany retreating. The ladies' powder room was lined with pink marble and smelled of expensive lilies. Amelia pushed the door open to find Tiffany leaning over the sink, splashing cold water on her face. Her mascara was running, and her shoulders were shaking. Tiffany looked up in the mirror, her eyes widening when she saw Amelia. "You," Tiffany breathed, spinning around. She looked terrified. "What are you doing here, Brad is going to kill you if he sees you." "Brad can't hurt me anymore," Amelia said softly. She locked the door behind her. "You look different," Tiffany whispered, wiping her eyes. "You look like you own the place." "I used to think I wanted to own this place," Amelia said, walking closer. "Now I know it's just a cage. Tiffany, are you okay?" Tiffany let out a bitter laugh. "Okay, I'm pregnant, my feet are swollen, and Brad has spent the entire night flirting with the senator's daughter. He told me if I gained any more weight, he'd leave me in the guest house." She looked at Amelia, her eyes pleading. "He told me he loved me. He told me I was different from you." "He lied," Amelia said simply. "Brad doesn't love anyone but himself. You're just an incubator for his legacy, Tiffany. Once that baby is born, he'll treat you exactly the way he treated me. Actually worse. Because you know where the money comes from." Tiffany froze. I don't know what you mean." "The charity foundation," Amelia said, taking a gamble. "The checks you've been signing. Brian knows Tiffany. The FBI is investigating the cartel money laundering. When they come, Brad will blame you. Your signature is on the checks." Tiffany sank onto a velvet stool, clutching her stomach. "He told me it was for tax purposes. He said I was helping the family." She began to sob. "I don't want to go to jail. I just want to be a mum." Amelia knelt in front of her, taking Tiffany's hands. This was the woman who had helped ruin her marriage. Amelia should hate her. But looking at the terrified girl, Amelia only felt pity. "Listen to me," Amelia said urgently. "I can help you. Brian can protect you. We can get you immunity, but we need proof. We need the ledger in the safe." Tiffany sniffled. "The black book? Yes, do you know the code?" Tiffany nodded. "He made me memorize it because he was too drunk to open it last week. It's the date he acquired the company. 04/12/19. "Thank you," Amelia said, standing up. "Stay here. Lock the door. Don't come out until I come back for you." Amelia left the bathroom and moved quickly down the corridor. The hallway was empty. The staff and guests were all in the ballroom watching Brian, who was now charming the socks off the senator's wife, keeping the center of gravity in the room firmly on him. Amelia slipped into the library. It smelled of cigar smoke and old leather. The heavy curtains were drawn. She didn't turn on the lights. The moonlight filtering through the gap in the drapes was enough. She moved to the fireplace. Above it hung the portrait of Archibald Bennett Bradd's grandfather. With trembling hands, she gripped the heavy gilded frame and swung it outward. There it was. The steel wall safe. 04 12 19. She punched the numbers into the keypad. The light blinked red. Error. Amelia's heart stopped. Had Tiffany lied? Or had Brad changed it again? She tried again. 04. Error. Damn it! She hissed. Panic began to claw at her throat. She had 3 minutes left. She closed her eyes, trying to think like Brad. He was arrogant. He was sentimental about his own achievements. If it wasn't the company acquisition, what was it? What was the only thing Brad cared about right now? The heir. The baby, she whispered. Tiffany said they found out it was a boy the day before he kicked me out. That was November 23rd. She typed in 11:23:25. Click. The mechanism whirred and the heavy door popped open. Amelia let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She reached inside. There were stacks of cash, a box of watches, and a thick black leather-bound ledger. She grabbed the ledger. She flipped it open. It was all there. Illegal transfers, bribes to city inspectors, payments to shell companies. This was the nail in Brad's coffin. Found something interesting. The voice came from the shadows of the doorway. Amelia spun around, clutching the ledger to her chest. Brad was standing there. He had taken off his mask. His face was flushed with alcohol and rage. He held a heavy crystal decanter in his hand by the neck, swinging it slightly. I knew it. Brad slurred, stepping into the room and kicking the door shut behind him. I saw you leave the ballroom. I knew you couldn't stay away. You always were a snooping little bitch. Stay back, Brad, Amelia warned, backing up against the desk. Or what? Brad sneered. You'll call your boyfriend the gangster. He's busy entertaining the crowd. No one can hear you in here, Amelia. The walls are soundproof. I paid extra for that, so I wouldn't have to hear you crying about your barren womb. He lunged. Amelia dodged to the left, but Brad was faster than he looked. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it hard. Amelia cried out, dropping the ledger. You think you can steal from me? Brad shouted, pinning her against the mahogany desk. His breath smelled of rot. I made you. You were nothing before me, and you're nothing now. I am everything you're afraid of, Amelia screamed. She brought her knee up, driving it hard into his groin. Brad howled in pain, doubling over. Amelia scrambled for the ledger. She grabbed it and ran for the door. But Brad, fueled by adrenaline and rage, grabbed her ankle. She fell hard. The breath knocked out of her. He crawled on top of her, his hands reaching for her throat. I should have killed you when I had the chance. Suddenly the library door exploded inward. It didn't open. It was kicked off its hinges with a deafening crash. Brian stood in the frame. He wasn't wearing his mask. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Get off her! Brian roared. Brad looked up terrified. Valenti, wait! She's robbing me! She... Brian didn't wait. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He grabbed Brad by the back of his tuxedo jacket and hurled him across the room. Brad crashed into the bookshelf, books raining down on him. Brian knelt beside Amelia, his hands gentle as he checked her neck. Did he hurt you? I'm okay, Amelia gasped, clutching the ledger. I got it. I have the book. Brian looked at the ledger, then back at Brad, who was groaning on the floor, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "You are lucky, Bennett," Brian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "If she had been hurt, I would have peeled the skin from your bones." Brian helped Amelia stand. She smoothed her dress, her hands shaking. "We need to go," Amelia said. "Security will be coming." "Let them come," Brian said. "We have what we need." He turned to Brad. "The police will be receiving a copy of that book in the morning. Enjoy your party, Brad. It's the last one you'll ever host." They walked out of the library, leaving Brad broken amidst the wreckage of his own hubris. As they reached the hallway, Tiffany was waiting by the front door, wearing a heavy coat and holding a small bag. She looked terrified, but determined. "Is it done?" Tiffany whispered. "It's done," Amelia said. She looked at Brian. "She comes with us." Brian looked at Tiffany, then at Amelia. He nodded once. "Rocco is waiting with the engine running." The three of them walked out into the cool night air. The music from the ballroom was still playing, oblivious to the fact that the Bennett dynasty had just collapsed. As the car sped away from the estate, Amelia looked back one last time. She didn't feel sadness. She felt the heavy weight of the ledger in her lap and the warm, reassuring pressure of Brian's hand on hers. "What happens now?" Tiffany asked from the front seat, her voice small. Amelia looked at Brian. He smiled, a genuine warm smile that lit up the darkness of the car. "Now," Brian said, "we watch the house of cards fall." The sun rose over New York City with a deceptive calm, but inside the penthouse, the air was electric. Amelia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the black ledger sitting on Brian's desk, like a loaded gun. "It's begun," Brian said, entering the room with a tablet in hand. He cast the live news feed onto the wall screen. Urgent red banners flashed, "FBI raids Bennett Construction. Massive fraud scheme uncovered." Aerial footage showed a swarm of black tactical vehicles surrounding the Greenwich estate. Agents marched out, carrying boxes of evidence through the same heavy oak doors Amelia had been exiled from months ago. Then the camera zoomed in. Lydia Bennett was led out first. The woman who once reigned over society like a queen now looked like a drowned rat, her silk robe disheveled as she was guided into a squad car. Moments later, Brad emerged. He wasn't fighting. He looked shell-shocked, wearing yesterday's tuxedo pants, the cut on his forehead stark and red. He stared into the news camera with hollow eyes, looking like a child who had broken a toy he couldn't fix. He looked so small, Amelia noted, surprised by the cold finality settling in her chest. Brian stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "He is a man who built a castle on quicksand. The tide has finally come in." The Bennett Empire didn't just crumble, it evaporated. Within 48 hours, the stock hit zero. The Neo-Port Committee rescinded their offer and awarded the contract to the Valenti Group. Brian had won the war. But for Amelia, the victory wasn't complete until 3 weeks later. Brian called her into his study. When she entered, she found Dr. Aris, her former fertility specialist, sitting in a chair, sweating profusely. 2 of Brian's guards stood by the door. "What is he doing here?" Amelia asked, her stomach tightening. "The doctor has a confession to make regarding your medical history," Brian said, his voice dangerously low. Dr. Aris trembled, wiping his forehead. "Ms. Foster, I had no choice. Brad threatened to ruin my practice. He had leverage on my gambling debts." "Get to the point," Brian snapped. "The diagnosis," Aris stammered. "The structural damage to your uterus. It was a fabrication. You are perfectly healthy." The room spun. Amelia gripped the back of a chair. You lied. You let me believe I was broken. Brad wanted a divorce, Aris confessed rapidly. But the prenuptial agreement stated that if he filed without cause, you would get half his assets. If the divorce was due to your failure to produce an heir, the settlement was voided. He paid me $50,000 to fake the results. A scream built up in Amelia's throat. It wasn't biology, it was greed. For months, she had grieved children she thought she could never have, all because Brad wanted to save money. "Get him out of here," Amelia whispered, "before I kill him." "He's going to the police," Brian said. "He will never practice medicine again." As the guards dragged the weeping doctor away, Amelia sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands. Brian was there instantly, pulling her into his arms. He held her while she cried, not tears of sadness, but of release. "You are whole, Amelia," Brian whispered into her hair. "You were always whole." A month later, Amelia sat behind the thick glass partition at the Metropolitan Detention Center. On the other side, Brad Bennett shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit. His head was shaved, and his arrogance was gone, replaced by a twitchy desperation. He picked up the receiver with shaking hands. "Amelia, you have to help me. Talk to the DA. Tell them I was coerced by my mother. I can't survive in here." "The IRS seized your accounts this morning, Brad," Amelia said calmly. "The estate is being auctioned. You have nothing." Brad's face crumbled. "What about Tiffany? Is she okay? Did she have the baby?" "Tiffany is in witness protection," Amelia lied smoothly. In reality, Brian had set Tiffany up in Montana with a new identity and a trust fund. She had given birth to a healthy boy, Leo, far away from the Bennett toxicity. "You will never see her or your son again." Brad slammed his fist against the glass. "That's my son. That's my legacy." "You don't have a legacy," Amelia said, her voice turning to steel. "And I know about Dr. Aris, Brad. I know I'm not infertile." Brad froze. The color drained from his face completely. He opened his mouth to lie, but the cold intelligence in her eyes stopped him. He realized in that moment that she knew everything. "You tried to break me to save a few dollars," Amelia said, standing up. "You threw me away like trash. But you forgot one thing, Brad. Trash is what you leave behind. I'm the one who walked away." "Amelia, wait. Don't leave me here," Brad begged, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, I'll do anything." Amelia hung up the phone. She turned her back on the ghost of her past and walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. 1 year later. The terrace of the Valenti penthouse was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Amelia stood by the railing wearing a gown of white silk that flowed around her like water. She touched the sapphire necklace at her throat. She wasn't just a partner anymore. She was a legend. The press called her the Iron Rose, the woman who ran the charitable arm of the Valenti Empire, turning her pain into a shield for others. The glass door slid open, and Brian stepped out. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "The board meeting is finished," he murmured. "We are reshaping the skyline, Amelia." "We are," she agreed, leaning back into him. She turned in his arms, her eyes shining. "I have news, miraculous news." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. It was flat, but beneath the silk life was beginning. "The new doctor confirmed it today," Amelia whispered. "We're going to have a baby, Brian." Brian Valenti, the man who feared nothing, looked stunned. His dark eyes filled with emotion. He dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead against her stomach, his hands trembling slightly. "A family," he whispered, his voice thick. "You are giving me a family." "We are building one," Emilia corrected, running her fingers through his hair. "From the ashes." Brian stood and kissed her a kiss that tasted of victory and a love that had survived the storm. Below them the city lights twinkled. Somewhere in a dark cell, Brad Bennett sat forgotten. But up here, Emilia looked out at the horizon. She had been thrown out, discarded, and broken. But she had learned the most important lesson of all: when the world closes a door, you don't just find a window. You buy the whole damn building. Emilia took the hand of the devil to escape a demon, but she ended up finding an angel in disguise. Her revenge against Brad is just beginning, and trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. What do you think? Did she make the right choice going with the Mafia Don? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to see part 2, where Emilia gets her pretty woman moment, and Brad loses everything, hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the karma hitting back. Thanks for watching.